I want to give quick introductions and give a little bit of background as we get into this. So Tom at the end, Fran Joan. Tom leads Greylock's operations team, which includes marketing, executive and core talent, and customer development. Tom joined Greylock in 2010. Prior, Tom co-founded and served as CEO of 2 venture-backed startups. Most recently, he was CEO of Simply Continuous, a small enterprise-focused service provider and large-scale data backup and virtual server recovery business, obviously backed by Greylock. They sold to Net and Rich. Before that, he was co-founder and CEO of Telefia, who sold to Nielsen in 2007. So honored to have Tom here. Bipul, who has a really interesting background because he was at Lightspeed prior, came in, took over as CEO of Rubrik. Prior to that, he was at Bloomberg Capital, where he was founding investor and board member of Nutanix. And previous to that, he was director of database products at Oracle Corporation, where he led development of core data and transaction processing. So honored to have Bipul here. And last but not least, Krish. Krish joined Lightspeed in 2011, leads the firm's business services initiatives. Krish is focused on providing a broad range of business development, technical recruiting, and value-added services to Lightspeed portfolio companies, including running the Lightspeed CIO Forum. Prior to joining Lightspeed, Krish was at cloud storage startup Box, focused on enterprise partnerships, product strategy, and channel programs. Early in his career, Krish worked in business development group at Oracle, where he drove strategic partnerships and acquisitions and applications and systems management space. So again, very lucky to have these guys here. Excited about the conversation. The goal is we try to align ourselves with these guys because they're looking into the future every day. They're placing bets, making investments, and we have several companies that we've worked with over the years. I've got a list here of a few of them. Dynamic Ops, Cloudpia, Data Domain, Isilon, newer ones, Tintree, Nutanix, Rubrik. These are all we view as game-changing technologies. They're coming into the market. They're disrupting the way things were done, either by just doing them better or changing the game altogether. So I wanted to start out maybe with just discussing investment thesis. So as you guys look at the market and look at what's happening, how are you looking at it? What's your thesis? What areas are you focusing on? What areas are you avoiding? And maybe I can run through the three of you on that, and then I ask some other specific questions. So Krish, maybe we
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe to set the stage, I'll give you a little background on Lightspeed and sort of why we look at the areas we do. So Lightspeed's a fairly large early-stage venture capital firm. We've got over $4 billion of assets under management. So what that really helps us do is drive to large transformative exits, right? We're looking for category-leading companies, ones that can be leaders in their space, that are really going after wide markets. So that really drives a lot of the type of companies and the spaces we look at, because we're really looking at things that can be very large. So historically, the firm's done a lot in enterprise infrastructure, and more recently, things in consumer. We were the first check in Snapchat, for example. If you have a teenage daughter, you probably dislike me right now. But going forward, I think there's a lot of innovation to go fund. So we're looking at things like virtual reality, augmented reality, how that's going to affect the workforce, the applications and infrastructure needed to support it. We continue to look at IoT. We were early investors in things like Nest on the consumer side. I think going forward, we're going to be spending a lot of time on sort of the data and the infrastructure layers to support the proliferation of these devices. Hopefully a little more meaningful than a smart coffee maker or things like that, but more the enterprise applications of these things and the industrial applications. And then I think there's still a lot of infrastructure challenges to go solve, right? I mean, the running joke is we're plumbers and we just plumb for a new generation of technologies and solutions. So as things move more software, as we get new abstraction layers like containers and other things, you're still fundamentally solving the same challenges you had in the previous generation. So how do you secure these workloads? How do you wire them or plumb them together? How do you manage them and orchestrate them? And over time, how do you make the machines smart enough to do it themselves so you don't need to go chase down all the PhDs that Google and Facebook are hiring that make it harder for you guys to compete. So.
Any areas you're avoiding? I mean, just do you think they're oversaturated or not? Ultimately won't be relevant?
Yeah, I mean, as a firm, we tend to avoid direct consumer-facing plays if they have a hardware component. I think that's hard. I think there's a reason that platform players like Facebook and Apple and others, Google, have the reach to hit the consumer on hardware and platforms on that area. So we tend to play only in the software and the back-end spaces there. And then I think there's some things that are probably a little further than our immediate time horizon. So we have yet to look at investments in space tech, for example, and things that we probably see are a little further out. But I think that'll start changing over time.
Cool. You want to jump to Tom, and then I'll come back to you.
Sure. So maybe I'll take a slightly different spin and jump in. But similar to Krish, we spend most of our time thinking about software, both on the consumer side and the enterprise side. As we think about consumer, there's probably 2 or 3 big themes that we'll generally try to invest around. One is this notion you'll hear about in social networks or sort of network-driven businesses, but we fundamentally believe that there are businesses that can be driven to become kind of almost uncapped upside businesses, be it Snapchat, be it Facebook, LinkedIn, things like that. But really they have a component that, it's simple to say that there's virality or network effects to them, but understanding what those network effects are and understanding how to recognize that and understanding, what's kind of a false positive there is something that, we continue to look for. Recent things have been things like Nextdoor. We actually made some, a bet that hasn't played out like we thought it would in Meerkat, but similar along that theme. Another is really these, what we think of as transaction businesses. They look like e-commerce years ago. Today, look a lot more like marketplaces, be it the Airbnbs of the world or the Ubers of the world. Are probably some of the big themes there. And once again, we love transactions businesses that can show real profitability, not something that is, for example, leveraging our money to grow, right? That's probably a less attractive business. But by the way, we found ourselves in a few of those businesses and didn't realize it in time. More on the enterprise side, I think, as Krish mentioned, you end up in these times, your investment focus changes over time. In 2007, 2008, 2009, we were very focused on SaaS businesses just because we thought that was the right software model for delivery of enterprise applications. Clearly some of those same trends, cloud and mobile are happening. Some of the things Jason just talked about in terms of the cost of infrastructure and software-defined infrastructure, that makes, for us, or at least one view of investing in infrastructure, it's trickier, right? You do have to compete with kind of the open source, and Amazon and Azure's of the world kind of compressing you from both sides. So we're tending to look. We still will look in there, and I can show you examples of recent investments in those spaces. But on the flip side, spending a lot more time thinking about application tiers and what some of those items that have been enabled by that infrastructure. So data analytics, machine learning, how that applies to different applications or spaces we're spending a lot of time on. So
maybe just an additional question: when you look at companies.
Yeah.
How early are you typically getting in, or is it all over the place? You're getting in early, you're getting in later. Is there? Yeah.
So if you look over a broad time frame, so 10 or 15 years, we will invest across the spectrum. Our preference is clearly to the earlier side. So, for example, in the last 3 years, every investment we've made has either been the first investor or second investor. One of those I think you'd probably qualify as a growth investment just because the company was bootstrapped and did extraordinarily well. It's a company called GoFundMe, and we were part of the first investment, but this was a wildly profitable business. When we invested, so that tends to be where we are. But at different times of the kind of investment cycle, you'll see times where, for example, we invested. You guys had talked earlier today. Eric talked a lot about ServiceNow. We invested in ServiceNow just before they went public. So, and that's not, in some ways, that's probably not a classic venture investment, but it's one that, obviously we thought the team and the company were so great that we had the opportunity we couldn't pass up. So,
cool. So, Bipul, you have an interesting story that you've been kind of on a lot of sides of it. You were at Lightspeed for a while. You made the decision to go run Rubrik. A couple questions. One, why? what was the thought? Did you talk to Dan, or what was the thought of switching gears? And then two, how has your perspective changed? Obviously, when you're investing, you're looking at a company and you're thinking about what customers want. Now you're directly touching and talking to customers. Can you give us some insight on why you made the move and how your views changed?
Sure. So as a venture capitalist, what you do is you go and find people who have big ideas in terms of going after a large market with a product angle that can change the game of the market. So for example, very early on in my career, I invested in a company called Hootsuite in a social media management space where they were seeing the advent of Twitter and Facebook, and they had an idea that can enterprise leverage these trends and essentially create a marketing platform to go after. And then if you look at Nutanix, a similar kind of thesis that storage and compute are very large markets, but they are like designed to be separate. Can we combine them together and create a data center in a box? So that was my kind of investment thesis, that big idea, large market, find an entrepreneur who can go and change the landscape. And the more and more I kind of invested and worked with entrepreneurs, one thing that was missing was that I'm sitting on the sideline and cheering people who are actually running. And it felt a little bit dissatisfying because I'm an engineer by training and did operations at Oracle for a long time. So I had some of the training that is needed to go start and run my own company. And then when I was investigating a new area to invest in, I came across backup and recovery, and I felt that it's a very large market and largely underserved by incumbents. And that's like a gold mine for an investor or entrepreneur when you have a very large market that is underserved. And it felt to me that it is such a large market, and I had a product idea that can create a very large impact. I would be doing disservice to myself as well as to the industry if I don't jump out and really make this vision into reality. And that was the reason to jump out, essentially a reason to create an impact and create something out of nothing and go after a large market and see if we can create an institution that can last the next 25, 30 years.
How's it going?
Very well. I mean, it has really gone.
Do you like it?
Very much. If you ask me, like, what's the main difference being an entrepreneur versus an investor? As an investor, I used to do probably 1 to 2 investments a year because you can't find too many great ideas in a year. So you have like 1 or 2 interesting activity time in an investor's life. As an entrepreneur, you have an interesting activity every day because you are trying to recruit great people, you are trying to convince customers to buy from you, and you want to retain the great talent that you have already acquired. So it's very action-oriented. So I really enjoy it. It's a new life that I'm leading, but I'm having a lot of fun.
It's interesting. We had dinner last night, and I was talking to Tom, and one of the customers I was sitting with said, "Hey, I started talking to Tom, or actually they were out at a briefing, which we can talk a little bit about." He said, I sat down, and Tom got up and he started talking. And I said, "Oh, this guy really knows what he's talking about. He's an engineer. He's run a business." And I'm finding in a lot of these VCs, there are people that have started and run just like Tom. They've built businesses, sold them, built other businesses, and now they're coming in as coaches and operators of kind of a community of companies. So a lot of amazing talent. Question for you, Krish. Since you're at Box, obviously you see the cloud, you see SaaS, you see infrastructure service. A lot of this is happening. We're meeting with customers, and there's a lot of confusion right now. Everyone knows, I think unlike 2 or 3 years ago, people debated if the cloud was real. Like, is this thing really going to happen? I'd meet with customers, they'd be like, I'm never going to go to the cloud. And I think now we get in front of customers, and it's not a if, it's a when, but they just don't know how is cloud really going to play a role because it's so vast. Do you have some opinions on cloud and how it's going to impact traditional enterprises and how they should adopt, or what you're seeing from companies out there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of it's a little funny that 5 years ago when I was at Box, people would call us asking if we sold them cardboard boxes, right? That was the state of the cloud about 5 years ago. And we've come a long way since. I personally think we're still very early on in the game. This is still the first innings. I think we're going to look back in 20 years and sort of compare this to when PCs first came out and sort of what the next platforms would be. But I spend a lot of my time talking to IT executives, and that's the question they ask themselves is sort of what's the time horizon? How much time do I have? How do I balance what I own and manage myself and what I can tangibly touch versus what's in this amorphous blob that is very efficient and I can spin it up and down, but I can't wrap my head around. And I think that's an opportunity for venture capitalists to help with that transition, right? We spend a lot of our time thinking about how folks use clouds in real-world scenarios, and how their folks can sort of try to manage environments regardless of where they live. I'll give you an example. A recent investment of ours is called Cloud Passage. It's a security company, and the thesis is your workloads today, you shouldn't care where they run, but you should be able to manage and secure them regardless of where that is. And today, that's a very difficult thing to do, right? You have a set of tooling and infrastructure to help you manage security on premise. You have equivalents in the cloud, but they might be specific to that cloud. And as an enterprise, that's the last thing you want to do is sort of manage that complexity and be stuck in one environment. So we see that as a huge opportunity to go fund companies that'll let you be much more flexible, but provide you the same level of service you're getting in each of these environments. So how do you manage things now that the boundaries are very amorphous, right? And things are moving. And that's usually where the difficulty comes in, right? When you have this flux, this change happening and a bunch of boundaries, that's when the bad guys get in. So we actually see it as a great opportunity. I don't think there's a panacea yet. I think there's use cases that make sense for both. And I think that's just something you need to sit down maybe with partners like yourself to figure out, based on what the industry is doing and based on your actual needs, where it makes sense to run these workloads, right? But the beauty is, I think, given the abstraction layers we're getting today, I think you have that choice on where to run things, right? So focus internally on adding IP to your business, and then let your partners figure out, what infrastructure is best to help you achieve what you're trying to achieve.
Any comment on speed? I mean, this is something I'm trying to figure out, right? What are the inhibitors, and how fast is it going to move? Because it's going to change the landscape of a lot of companies, how they make money, what they're going to market it. And any comments on the speed of this? Does everybody think it's going to move faster than you really think it's going to move, or what's?
As a VC, we love speed, right? Like Bipple said.
Light speed, I get.
Yeah. Bipple alluded to this. There's a small window in which to get stuff done and really inflect sort of meaningful impact. And if you think about why the startups are able to do what they can, a lot of it has to do with things like the cloud, right? They don't have to build the substrates themselves, the architectures themselves. You don't need to take large checks to go stand up Oracle environments like you did 20 years ago. Things like open source help with development, right? You're not rewriting everything. The community is helping you, and you're sort of progressing. So we tend to love that speed. I know it poses some challenges, and you have to wait for the regulatory and compliance issues to catch up. But I think that's just the way businesses are moving today, right? And to the extent that you can innovate on your business and not worry about sort of the IT and the speed that's happening on, I think that's the real opportunity for most non-technology focuses businesses today, right? How do I leverage that speed to get better at what I do and focus on my core business?
You had a comment, Bipple?
So in my mind, if you look at cloud, you are running your workload in somebody else's data center, essentially. And then public cloud is really an infrastructure of compute, memory, network, and storage. But you need a killer application to be able to leverage cloud. Because for a lot of enterprises who have bought millions and millions of dollars of owned infrastructure, they look at cloud, they want to get there, they want to use that pay-as-you-grow economics, but they don't know how to use it because there is a missing killer application link from their own infrastructure and their own application and this cloud thing that they are looking at. So as the innovation start to come in from Silicon Valley and other places where people find or build killer application for the cloud infrastructure, for typical enterprise or traditional enterprise to use the cloud and not get daunted by the complexity or the APIs and things like that the cloud providers provide, that's the gap that the industry has to fill. So in Rubrik, the way we look at ourselves is, if you look at the cloud, it's a giant disk. So can we leverage the giant disk on the cloud for people to archive their data, but enable search on that data so that they can retrieve it back super fast? That's like one aspect of building a killer application for Amazon or for other platforms. Unless we have that in other aspects of enterprise computing, the cloud will remain a slow adoption path. And I think the Silicon Valley can really fill in this gap of creating that killer app.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I think the one other thing I'd add is I think cloud's another way of thinking about cloud is scale out, right? So Amazon, Google, Azure have really been able to have the amount of workloads to be able to pull that scale out, and Facebook, you see that doing in their own. I think you'll see that ability to scale out come downstream as well. I think that's going to be an interesting thing to look at. Call it 4 or 5 years from now, as some of these automation around that scale out happens, and I think that's going to be another interesting trend.
So maybe kind of on that note, question for you, Tom. I feel like 15, 20 years ago, this phrase of, I'll never get fired for buying IBM. And it seemed like as new products were coming out, even in the 90s, that was always a hurdle that larger customers just didn't want to take the risk on a startup for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely.
And I feel like that's changing now. I see large enterprises willing to roll the dice on new companies or new solutions that are going to provide value in somehow. Given you've run companies, you've invested in a lot of companies, what should clients be thinking about before because once you get this stuff in, sometimes it's very hard to get it out. What are maybe 3 or 4 things you think about, prior to investing in a company that could apply?
Yeah, and so look, there's the obvious, maybe not obvious, but exactly as Bipul thought about it. There's people, there's markets, there's product, right? And that's, if it were that easy, we'd all be great venture capitalists and we'd all have great returns, right? What I think is really tricky about understanding, especially at the earliest stage, before a company has product, is some of the things that, frankly, Bipul can talk about more specifically, but it's not just having a great idea or having a great CTO or great early product, but to build that, you need to get an amazing team, especially if they're based in Silicon Valley. I look at some of the guys on Bipul's team, some of his co-founders, their ability to go recruit the next great generation of engineers to work with them because they're going to have the right technical challenges, they're going to continue to learn. Those are the kind of things that we have to look at to be able to say, it's not just a great CEO and a great head of marketing or whatever, but this is a team that continue to build that team so they'll be successful. Because once again, like every young business when you start it, the next challenge is always the hardest one, right? You've never run out of great challenges. And so, for example, getting started and getting, early product market fit, that's amazingly hard. But once you do that, then you're faced with we have to then start having a consistent go-to-market, right? And now it's not just that Bipul's great at telling the story, because he is, but then Bipul having a team that everyone can tell the same story, right? And then it gets to all the other parts of scale. And so to me, that's, us understanding why this young team can get to scale, that's, I think, the hardest part of early stage investing. And so how does that translate back? If I were you guys, I would also be asking those questions. Like, do you think taking a risk on a young company, is this the company or the type of company that's going to be able to get to scale and therefore be a long-term partner for me? Those are the kind of things that we think a lot about. And that would be the kind of lens I would also look through for when you take a risk or when you don't for a young company personally. So I don't know, Bipul, does that, you live this now? I'm just sitting on the sidelines. Does any of that ring true, or am I blowing smoke?
I mean, I get these questions often, these kind of questions often, that would you get sold to some larger player, or would you be in business 5 years down the line? I think as an investor, when I was looking at companies, I always looked at the motivation of founders and the underlying structure of financing for the company. So if an entrepreneur is motivated not to just make quick money, but create an institution or create something which is bigger than themselves, that's a good start. And then also look at the money that is behind the company. So if you have situations where the investors behind the company have like a small fund and they would be happy making $50, $100 million out of the company, in those situations you have pressure from the investor to have quick liquidity. But if you have investors like Lightspeed and Greylock who have like billion-dollar funds, and their goal is to create like $1 billion outcome for themselves from the company, then the company is structurally designed to go public or structurally designed to go big. They may fail at it, but they are structurally designed to go big. So the combination of the entrepreneur's vision and underlying capital structure dictates how big and how far you will go as a company.
That's a good point.
Interesting. Maybe switching gears a little bit, and this is a question for you, Bipul. Selfishly, as we're looking at companies, and we're obviously, we sell technology. You know, we make money, we go out, we consult, we advise, and then ultimately we sell a solution and implement it. What role, I used to work at IBM, and I saw the role of the IBM business partner and what Gershner did, and you've seen this evolve over the years. As you're creating a company and you've seen investments in company, what's the role of partners tomorrow? Because it feels like it's not going to be like it was. How do you see your go-to-market or companies you've invested in go-to-market, and what's the role of partners in that world?
This is a very good question, particularly the changes that we are seeing in the ecosystem. So I would start by saying that today's customers, the end user customers, are much more informed and smart than they were like 5-10 years ago, because of the massive explosion in social media and information availability. And they know a whole lot about what's going on in the industry, what are the different solutions. And that actually fundamentally is good for channel partners such as Ahead, as well as the manufacturer such as Rubrik. Because what happens is the relationship and trust that the customer has in Ahead, because of years of providing a great solution, great service to the customer, combined with great technology that a new company such as Rubrik can provide in the ecosystem, these two things can really do the magic. That's how we view our company. We are 100% channel company because we believe that we have a great ability to create great product, and we need go-to-market partners to actually go reach to customers and use and leverage the trust and relationship that the channel partners have and the years of service that they have provided. And they know what's the best fit for the customers much better than a manufacturer. So these two things coming together creates a lot of value. And I don't think this equation is going to change. The technology will change and the method of delivery might change, but the fundamental trust and relationship and ability to understand the fundamental nature of the customer's business and how to serve that business better with the right set of technology is the service that reseller partners provide, and I don't think that's going to change.
I'm glad that means we'll stay in business. So on to, and I'll wrap up with this because we've got a little over a minute left. We talked about this last night. We stay close to these guys. We do VC briefings where we bring people out to Silicon Valley, go to Greylock, go to Lightspeed. Maybe you could give just a minute on the value you see clients get when they come out to a briefing. What do they see? How do they feel? What are their takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. It's we love doing them. They're sort of our way of exposing our geek children to the world. Startups are head down developing product and working on really hard problems. Especially in the early stages, they're not devoted to marketing and getting their name out there. So a lot of the companies that you'll meet on a briefing might not be on your radar. They're 3 or 4 years before they're hitting Gartner Magic Quadrants or cool vendors, right? So we find it's a great opportunity for your teams to use it as a discovery session, kind of understand what's happening in the ecosystem, maybe avoid trying to build some of these solutions in-house, which end up being a little more costly and probably not as flexible. And in many cases, just learning from the culture of how small teams can really build sort of impactful solutions, right? It's something special in the Valley that very small teams are able to do what they're able to do, and it's to Bipul's point of the team you hire and the goals they set for themselves. So, and conversely, as VCs, we love doing it just to get your input, right? Are we smoking a little something too much in the Valley, or are these solutions that are applicable across the world, right? We really don't want to go fund a company that's only suitable for the Facebooks of the world, right? So can we go find solutions that sort of solve your problems? Can you help influence some of that roadmap so they're solving real problems that you have? And hopefully there's a good synergistic relationship there, right? We get to expose stuff to you and get feedback from the companies, and the companies get a chance to learn what your real world issues are, and in some cases tweak their roadmaps to help solve that.
Yeah, we've seen, we've done several briefings now, and it's just eye-opening. I'm not gonna knock on the Midwest. I'm from here, but it's just such a different world out there, and the way people are thinking, and the way people are, hey, we're going to change the world, we're going to disrupt, and it's contagious. And you get in that environment, and you come back, and you're just jacked to go do something, even if you don't know quite what it is yet, but go make change.